Good afternoon. Welcome to Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church, this place of simple beauty and serenity for this special service of remembrance and celebration. I'm the Reverend Abhijana Manchi, one of the ministers serving this religious community, and I welcome all of you who are gathered here in person and also those of you who are joining us online for this service. If you would like, please mention in the chat, those of you who are online, your name and where you're joining us from today. And if this is your first time at a Unitarian Universalist memorial service, we want you to know that we're part of a congregational Protestant lineage of Christian churches. But more than a century ago, we decided that we would rather build our religious community on the promises we make with one another about how we respect and treat each other, rather than on uniformity of belief. So as a non-creedal religious community, we honor religious wisdom and spiritual truths wherever we find it, in the great religious traditions, in nature, and also in our own hearts. And when we grieve, we use our memorial services as occasions to celebrate the life of a loved one, rather than as an occasion for a proclamation of faith. We honor the fact that each of us has brought our own spiritual understanding of the mysteries of life and death and the interval in between, and will find consolation in those understandings as we come to accept this loss. So this afternoon, through words and stories, music and song, we will weave together the life of Dave Seidman, knowing that the fullness of his life cannot be fully captured in an hour. And in doing so, we celebrate the life that he lived, the loves that he cherished, the beauty that he created, and the values that he embodied. And in this way, we hope to inspire each one of us to do the same. So let us, at this time, center ourselves, invoking the spirit of life and love, in which we live, move, breathe, and have our being, to be with us in this hour, as we give thanks for all that is the life of David Seidman. Welcome.
As is the custom of our faith tradition, we open this sacred time with the lighting of the chalice. Today, this is the flame of memory and hope that we carry within us as we honor Dave. We acknowledge that a human life is sacred in its beginning and at its end. And as Dave's grandchildren, Sonia, Roscoe, and Levi, kindle the memorial flame, we invite you to please rise in body or spirit as we share the chalice lighting words in your order of celebration. We light this chalice in loving memory of our friend and spiritual companion, Dave Seidman, and in tribute to the love a single life can inspire. We light this flame of life, of love and truth for the divine promise of healing hearts. May the chalice remind us of the extravagant gift of life. May it signify the community we create in our being together and our sharing together. You may be seated. Thank you.
We invite you now to join your hearts and your voices in singing hymn number 123, Spirit of Life, which is in the hymnal. And we're going to follow along to this beautiful recording.
Henry Van Dyke, 19th century clergyman and poet. I am standing upon the seashore. A ship at my side spreads her white sails to the morning breeze and starts for the blue ocean. She is an object of beauty and strength. I stand and watch her until at length she hangs like a speck of white cloud, just where the sea and the sky come to mingle with each other. Then someone at my side says, "There she goes." Gone where? Gone from my sight, that is all. She is as large in mast and hull and spar as when she left my side. And she is just as able to bear her load of living freight to her destined port. Her diminished size is in me, not in her. And just at the moment when someone at my side says, "There, she is gone," there are other eyes watching her coming, and other voices ready to take up the glad shout, "Here she comes," and that is dying.
Thank you, Dancia. The details of a person's life story can never encompass the many meanings of that life, but the details are a place to begin. David Richard Seidman was born on June 24th, 1934, in Shaker Heights, a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. He was the only child of Stanley and Lucille Seidman. His father was Jewish and his mother Protestant. Stan, his father, worked for Ohio Bell as an electrical engineer for many years, and Lucille worked in the school system. As a child growing up, Dave loved learning, and his mother tutored him. And he excelled in science and math in school and ended up taking many gifted classes. After graduating from Western Reserve Academy, an elite prep school in Hudson, Ohio, Dave enrolled at MIT, where he received a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Management and later on an MS in economics. He also became very interested in an emerging field at that time called operations research, which was a combination of math and systems, and so went back to school in Cleveland to get a PhD. And while attending there, he decided to take flying lessons one summer and received a pilot's license, despite his instructor's misgivings. Now, before going into computers and IT, Dave worked for 5 years at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, where he worked alongside city planners on statistical models to forecast where people and businesses would be in the future. Dave moved to the DC area in the late 1960s and started working for the federal government, first at the old Health, Education, and Welfare Department, which would be later renamed as Health and Human Services. Later, he moved to the office of the CTO, or OCTO, with the DC government, where he spent most of his career. At OCTO, Dave initiated, developed, and managed DC's geographic information system, somewhat similar to Google Maps, as he said, a system that manages property lots, health data, and trash collections. He also initiated an improved version of their performance measurement program. Dave received numerous awards and recognitions in his career, including a certificate for outstanding performance from then Mayor Anthony Williams, and upon his retirement in 2009, a meritorious public service award for his 35 years of service from Mayor Adrian Fenty. Dave and Sally met in 1999 at a spiritual singles group that used to meet in people's homes. Sally hosted one of the meetings on the topic of numerology. Dave went to the meeting thinking it was about math. They met again a few months later at a group event and started seeing each other. They were married in 2004. Retirement years brought time for volunteer work as secretary of the Homeowners Association, including setting up their website, also involvement with Sally here at Cedar Lane, and Dave was a member of the men's group and the Soul Matter small group ministry group, and spending time with Sally and friends, going to movies, restaurants, concerts, museums, and art galleries. Dave died on January 26, 2022. He's predeceased by his son, Matthew, and is survived by his beloved wife, Sally, his first wife, Barry, his daughter-in-law, Hilda, and his 3 grandchildren, Sonia, Roscoe, and Levi. I think Dave would say that it was a good life.
When a good person dies, his friends gather together for many reasons. Life has touched them with a deep grief, and they need one another's company for their own comfort. Just to be together, to look into friends' faces and see the common expression of hurt that takes away the loneliness of their feeling and draws their hearts together in the blessed healing that people can offer one another. At such a time, the various faiths which sustain us separately come together in harmony, which acts across all creeds and assures us of the permanence of goodness, the inspiration of dedication, the value of a serviceable life. It is well for us to speak of those qualities which we treasure in our friend, for by speaking of them, they somehow become vital and enduring and grow into us, that we take on what was noble and become what was noble ourselves.
Hello. I'm deeply honored to be speaking in memory and celebration of Dave Seidman. Dave was a pretty wonderful father-in-law, a loving father to Matt, and a sweet grandfather to our 3 kids, Sonia, Roscoe, and Levi. He also had a pilot's license. Who knew? Dave first came into my life when Matt and I started dating 20 years ago. We tragically lost Matt, Dave's son, in September 2018, a tear in the fabric of life. Matt would have certainly been here today to speak fondly and wittingly about his father. He would have loved to share with you all his fondest memories of his dad and to truly celebrate him in only a way that Matt Seidman knew how to celebrate. June of 2018 would be the last time the kids and I saw Dave with Matt. Dave was beginning to suffer from Alzheimer's at the time, but was present and his lovely self as we all went to a nearby playground together. Dave, as per his grandpa self, willing and delighted, got on a teeter-totter with his grandkids. Dave and Matt, father and son, were both intellectually brilliant men. They were also, I would discover, deep feeling types. When I first met Dave, it was in Louisville, Kentucky, where Matt was performing in a theater festival, and Dave was there to support Matt. I came to learn that Dave had done this quite a bit over the years, showing up to see Matt's productions at Stanford, at University of Washington, and in New York City. At this particular theater performance, I visited too. Matt and I had only been dating for a couple of months. We were falling madly in love with one another, and meeting Matt's dad was something I was both excited and nervous about. What immediately struck me about Dave was how warm and lovely his presence was, but I was confused. Matt's dad had a truly introverted constitution. On the typology spectrum, Matt and Dave were complete opposites, extroverted and introverted. Yet Dave and Matt were not unalike. They both shared these wonderful brown, soulful eyes, which Roscoe clearly inherited. Sharing eye contact with both of these men always gave me the feeling of being seen in a way that was so comforting. I could take in this similarity, but was confused how Matt energetically took up so much space when he'd walk into a room, and a father who was tall in stature, physically larger than Matt, but within himself, and gave that impression of still waters run deep. Despite being so constitutionally different in this way, they complemented each other as father and son and truly appreciated these differences in each other, and both had a capacity to play. Then I got my first hug from Dave. He was a super good hugger. He would give these generous, solid, not rushed, paternal, heartfelt hugs. I still remember the first hug. I also remember the hugs over the years from him at his beautiful wedding to Sally, and then getting a hug from him at Matt's and my wedding, where he spoke so eloquently about our connection, as well as hugs on every visit afterwards as kids arrived in our world and there were opportunities to connect and catch up. Those hugs were always so special. Over the years, I came to really appreciate Dave's superior intellectual function. Barry recently shared with me that Matt would explicitly talk about his awe and appreciation of his father's mind even as a teenager. Matt would certainly express over the years with me his admiration for his father's intellectual capabilities and professional accomplishments. There was even a period of time where Dave was involved in building and renovating properties, and Matt would also comment on his dad's carpentry talents and mastery of the skills needed. Dave, turns out, even had a well-developed sensate function and was versed even in plumbing. So handy. Sally shared his memory with me where Dave was on the phone with their California contact to deal with the reverse osmosis system when he said, "Randy, I think this time we need to get a plumber." And Randy said, "Good grief, no. Dave, I have taught you so well. You know much more than any plumber would about this. Let's keep working and we'll figure it out." They did. As Matt and I started a family, our life moved away from a life in the theater into building a tutoring company in New York City, which is still alive and well today despite all that has gone down in our lives and in the world. Dave was always available and supportive in these early years of running this business, to process structural components, to strategize on theory and approaches. Dave would consult on systems that we were implementing for the business and would always circle back and follow up with Matt on what his discoveries, research, assessments, and recommendations were. I believe this little company is alive and well today in part because of Dave's early guidance and foundational support. Above and beyond Dave's intellect, I grew to appreciate his deep spiritual side, which brings us to the fourth function, intuition. As Matt and I would have dinners with Sally and Dave over the years, I absolutely loved our discussions. I delighted in this paradox of accomplished intellectual thinking types that had no issue with going into the vast, expansive mysteries of the human experience and the unknown. I started training to become a Jungian psychoanalyst over a decade ago, hence the references to functions and typology, and so appreciated that my studies around Carl Jung's work on the divine, the religious instinct, and the collective unconscious were welcome and engaging topics with Dave and Sally. My thesis in training was on the feminine divine and the Gnostic Sophia, which is a balancing and connecting archetype to the masculine in the current collective. Particularly in Dave's later years, I experienced and also heard that others close to him witnessed this development of wholeness and a balancing of the masculine and the feminine within. Here's a passage from the Nag Hammadi scriptures I'd like to share with you. If those who lead you say to you, "See, the kingdom is in the sky," then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, "It is in the sea," then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known, and you will realize that it is you who are the sons of the living Father. Dave would always get a sparkle in those Seidman eyes when we ventured into this spiritual terrain and content. I will miss those conversations. I will miss him. Dave was clearly a brilliant man. He was also full of spirit, generous with his attention, and always available for meaningful and authentic connection, and a really good hugger.
I wrote this little piece about experience that I remember with Dave and I. Dave and I together, we rode together in a carpool for several years, going to bonding group in Northern Virginia. Sometimes the talk during our ride was quite humorous. Like the time I suggested he see a particular doc that I had good luck with regarding how to make myself more healthy. So Dave got an appointment. During a later ride, I asked him if he saw the doc, and he said yes. Did you get the immune booster shots and the diet plan? He said yes. Are you going back for more help? He says, no. I said, no, why not? He said with a grin and a chuckle, he looks at me, he says, I guess I didn't want to stop indulging myself. And I'll tell you, we laughed. What I remember is that I enjoyed being with him. He never criticized me. He never said a mean thing about me or about anyone else. However, that didn't mean that he didn't have opinions or that he wasn't aware of other people, their good parts and their bad parts. But he didn't dwell on them, and he didn't run them down. In doing personal work with him in group, I always felt safe, and I always felt like he had my best interest at heart. In addition, he never mentioned or bragged about how smart he was and that he had a PhD. I never even knew it till many, many years later. And it was easy to call him a friend, and I miss him. Okay, this song is called What a Wonderful World, and this is dedicated to my old friend, Dave Seidman. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue, clouds of white, the dark blessed day and the dark sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world, where the colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are on the faces of the people passing by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. And I think to myself,
An individual human existence should be like a river, small at first, narrowly confined within its banks and rushing passionately past boulders and over waterfalls. Gradually, the river grows wider, the bank recedes, and the waters flow more quietly, and in the end, without any visible break, they become merged into the sea and painlessly lose their individual being. The man who in old age can see his life this way will not suffer from the fear of death, since the things he cares for, will continue.
Am I that tall? For those who do not know me, my name is Mohsen, Mo for short. I'm here to celebrate with you the amazing life of my friend, David Seidman. I first met Dave in person at his marriage to Sally. I've already talked to Dave for probably 4 years on the phone about everything under the sun. I have known Sally since 1969 when I first came to this country as a foreign exchange student. And I was looking for a French-speaking person because my English was limited to 1 hamburger for lunch, 2 hamburgers for dinner. That's all I knew. Sally was volunteering at the Meridian House International in DC, an entry point for people coming to the US through the AID program or other government programs. She came to my rescue. She introduced me to the Astor restaurant, a Greek restaurant. I think it was on K Street, but I'm not sure. A nice Greek bistro where I could finally have rice, meat dishes, spaghetti, and all that. Since then, Sally has been my family, even though we lived on different coasts of the country. Dave and Sally visited California a couple of times, and we enjoyed their company tremendously. I spent half a day with Dave in San Francisco and Sally when they were attending a conference, visiting museum, exploring the city. I also brought them to Santa Clara where my wife and I lived. They met my in-laws in Palo Alto, and my mother-in-law was super impressed with Dave. Ever since I met Dave, it was as if I've known him forever. We were both IT people. He was in GIS. I was a system programmer with the San Jose Police Department, where I also worked with the geographical data system. We talked IT, compared stories, notes. We also talked politics, sciences, religions, you name it. Finally, here is someone who, when I said Botswana, he knew I was talking about a country and not about Indian Pocahontas. Dave is not gone. He's in each and every one of us who knew him. We were blessed to have him in their lives. Thank you.
Hello everyone. I'd like to start by sending my heartfelt condolences to the Seidman family and thanking Sally and the family for giving me this opportunity to provide a note on my experience having known Dave over 20 years. I met Dave in 2001 when he interviewed me for consulting work in geographic information systems back when he was the manager of the GIS program at the Office of the Chief Technology Officer, otherwise known as OCTO, for the DC government. During the interview, he was crystal clear on what he wanted to achieve with his implementation plan to make GIS a ubiquitous operational system for the government by adding value to the quality of services the residents received. I took the position and worked with him and the team for a few years to where we were nominated and won the National Association of State CIOs Best GIS program in the early 2000s. What made it worthwhile to work on the project beyond it being a visionary project was the way Dave led and worked as a team member towards achieving these goals and selflessly participated as a servant leader over the duration of his time working on the DC GIS program. One of the key things that made the GIS program in DC government was Dave's keen insight early on to building and working in a collaborative manner and building relationships with agencies and the general geospatial community in the DC area. He also worked hard to collaborate really well with leaders inside the Office of the Chief Technology Office, as well as including towards integrating the GIS as a common government technology that the rest of the agencies were willing to use, and his willingness to let go and have it grow up as part of the DC government IT infrastructure, making it one of the longest lasting programs in the country and a ubiquitous part of the IT and data world for many users outside of the government, including research and development organizations, universities, and companies all over the United States and the world. I learned a lot from Dave during those years, including how to stay humble and while working with adversarial situations towards meeting your technical and implementation objectives. Beyond the day-to-day work experience with Dave, he also personally believed in my personal entrepreneurial endeavors and encouraged me all the way. Dave had a great personal connection with many of his team members who would make time to meet and discuss ideas and interests beyond the daily work routine. Dave liked Chinese food, and he invited me several times to his favorite restaurant, Tony Chang's on H Street, just a few blocks from his office. I've heard from many of our colleagues who work with Dave over the years, and all of them have expressed the same feeling as I have of pride of having known a gentle giant that Dave was in the GIS and IT world in the district. Many have sent their condolences directly to Sally, and others have participated in sending contributions to the family's choice of charities. I want to thank you for the opportunity to remember Dave. What a wonderful life he led. Thank you.
Thank you, Gurmai, for your moving reflection about Dave and talking about his support and encouragement for your entrepreneurial efforts. Let's now watch a video clip in which you will see Dave commending the work of Gurmai's company, NLT, on their 10th anniversary, and gives us an opportunity to see and hear Dave.
I worked for the district government for 37 years. For most of the time with OCTO, I was working on the geographic information system. I initiated it. And so Gurmai was hired to get all this together, to connect the GIS with all the other technology that it needed to connect with. People loved it, and it was extremely helpful in agencies like the Department of Public Works and the Department of Transportation. What blew me away was this very, quite young guy was talking to each of these technology groups in their language. And Gurmai had this broad array of knowledge across all the technologies, and I was just blown away.
It's really good to see and hear Dave. The philosopher George Santayana wrote, "To see things under the form of eternity is to see them in their historic and moral truth. not as they seemed when they passed, but as they remain when they are over. When a person's life ends, it remains true that they have lived. It remains true that they have been one sort of person and not another. In the infinite mosaic of history, that bit has its unfading color and its perpetual function and effect. A person who understands themselves under the form of eternity knows the quality that eternally belongs to them and knows that they cannot wholly die, even if they would. For when the movement of their life is over, the truth of their life remains and endures. So think of Dave this way. What is the truth of his life that remains and endures? I've considered what might possibly be called the several truths of his life. There is the truth of his love for Sally. Dave loved Sally, and she loved him back deeply and completely. Sally was his love, his wife, his best friend, his spiritual companion, and in the last few years of his life, his caregiver. There's the truth of his love for his family. He was a caring husband, a loving father, and a doting grandfather. There's the truth of his long and distinguished government service, including 35 years of invaluable analytical and systems work for the DC government. His contributions, his intellectual leadership, and systems understanding left an invaluable legacy. There's the truth of his being a wonderful colleague and mentor to many, someone who took the time to know, support, and encourage his colleagues. Then there's the truth of his intellectual keenness and his holy curiosity. His religious views resemble closely Thomas Paine's words in The Age of Reason. I believe in the equality of humans, and I believe that religious duties consist in doing justice, loving mercy, and endeavoring to make our fellow creatures happy. Now, there are other truths as well. Dave was humble. He was genuine, loyal, generous, compassionate. He was introverted. He had a wry sense of humor. He had a lifelong love for music, especially classical music. One of his classmates fondly remembers Dave conducting with a baton that he was gifted in his dorm room, with classical music playing loudly. Imagine that. Now, in all these ways, and in so many other ways, we remember Dave Seidman. We give thanks for his life and his legacy, for his convictions, for his humility, for his humanity, for his career, for his service to church and to community. His was a purpose-filled, well-lived life. And in this context, I want to invite my colleague, Reverend Katie, to share something special, to lift up a commendation that emphasizes this purpose-filled, well-lived life.
I hold in my hands this letter from the Executive Office of DC Mayor Muriel Bowser. On behalf of all Washingtonians, I wish to express my deepest condolences on the passing of your husband, grandfather, family member, colleague, and friend, David Seidman. Throughout his 35 years of public service, David met obstacles with fortitude and discernment, and at his core, he was a problem solver and a leader. When faced with the 1990s budget crisis, he helped form a coalition between the Department of Public Works and the federal government's National Capital Planning Commission, and in doing so, helped pioneer the district's use of computer mapping. As one of the founding employees of the Office of the Chief Technology Officer in 1998, David initiated and managed the development of the DC Geographic Information System, which today remains crucial to the district's everyday operations and continues to serve as a national model for the state and local governments. David's life work is enduring and can be seen in the mechanisms behind emergency services, property tax administration, environmental analyses, and many, many more of the crucial operations Washingtonians rely on day in and day out. His lifelong commitment to public service and improving the lives of Washingtonians remain a remarkable source of inspiration for all who knew him. In 2002, David received a certificate for outstanding performance from Mayor Anthony Williams, and upon his retirement in 2009, received the Meritorious Public Service Award presented by Mayor Adrian Fenty. I'm humbled to join my predecessors in recognizing the immensely valuable impact that David's work has had in serving Washingtonians, and I'm proud to join his family in honoring a purpose-filled life so very, very well lived. As you mourn, please rely on the strength, love, and support of your family and friends. Those we love do not go away. They walk beside us every day, and David Seidman leaves behind a skillful and generous legacy of service, devotion, light, and love, which will not soon be forgotten. May his memory always be a blessing and a profound guide for you tomorrow and every day after. To his beloved wife, to his adored grandchildren, to family members and friends, and to all who love David, please know that you are in my thoughts and prayers during this difficult time. And it is signed, Mayor Muriel Bowser. I invite you to rise in body or spirit as we sing our closing hymn, Joyful, Joyful. Our benediction is a poem from the Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore. Peace, my heart, let the time of parting be sweet. Let it not be a death, but completeness. Let love melt into memory and pain into song. Let the flight through the sky end in the folding of the wings over the nest. Let the last touch of your hands be gentle, like the flower of the night. Stand still, O beautiful end, for a moment, and say your last words in silence. I bow to you and hold up my lamp to light you on your way.